Good day and welcome to Diksha. On today's episode, we will be discussing the ego. In today's world, we hear a lot about the ego. We hear it being mentioned in both Western and old Eastern teachings that we should not have too great an ego or we should avoid being egoistic. However, what is the ego? Or what is this thing or this entity that defines what an ego is? So in today's episode, I will be looking at defining the ego, and probably we can decide or look at what are some of the positive aspects of the ego and what are the negative aspects of the ego, and should we be avoiding our ego. So first of all, we will start by defining what the ego is. If we look at ourselves in terms of our beliefs, our ideas, our emotions, and our knowledge, so our understanding, we begin to project, if we will, an image of ourselves onto the world. And this image that we project would have a combination of, let's say, information from these facets. So we would not project all of our knowledge at one time. We would not project all of our emotions at one time or in one situation. And likewise, we would not project all our ideas and beliefs. This is when we start to let's say group or to put together an appropriate image which we want to project to the world, to the public. This group or grouping is called the ego. Simply put, it's a set image which we project to meet the other set images which we meet in the world. And behind the ego, we will have what we choose to keep back from being projected. Now, what we choose to project will be based on what we know, so knowledge, what we feel, what emotions we are aware of, or what our dominant emotions are, our beliefs, and our experiences. So we begin to distill these down into what we deem appropriate for the world. Logically, we can see where the greater our knowledge, and by greater, I don't mean academia only, but knowledge from experience as well, knowledge from interacting and introspecting. We have beliefs, and beliefs will not only be religious beliefs, but also beliefs from, again, our experiences. And our emotions in terms of but especially how we feel about ourselves in our own knowledge of ourselves. So we begin to define or fine-tune what we want to project to the world based on our capacity and our base of who we are. Now, the base of who we are we can term as the self. So, considering that the mass of who we are is called the self, the ego is part of the self, not the entire self. So we are not projecting all of ourselves into the public. For example, as an employee, we project a particular ego. As a sibling, we project another particular part of ourselves another particular ego. As a husband or a wife or a boyfriend or a girlfriend in a relationship, we project another part of our ego. And as we go along and as we begin to define ourselves, we begin to define our ego. Now, I want, first of all, that we understand where I am coming from with this definition of what the ego is. So we have not said that the ego is bad or good. I'm just laying the groundwork of saying that we have a mass called the self, and the ego is simply a projection of what we want to send forth in the world to represent us, to represent the self. So, what does it mean, or what does it entail when people say do not have a big ego, or do not have or don't let your ego get too big, or what's another phrase you could use for that? Don't become too egoistic. What that really refers to is the projection that we need to look at. Now remember, the ego itself is part of our base. So when somebody is speaking about our ego, we may need to look at simply what we project into the society or into the relationship to say, probably I'm projecting wrongly something in myself, or perhaps within myself, or the base, the mass base, there is something that needs to be looked at or corrected, or probably properly analyzed, so that when projected through the means of the ego, will be an improvement. So the ego, in a sense, is not something to get rid of entirely, but rather something to be fine-tuned and constantly modified and analyzed on a day-to-day basis or moment-to-moment basis to see that we are properly projecting what is within ourselves. Now, one common misconception is that we feel that we should have no ego, especially if somebody makes a comment saying that we are too egoistic, or we have a big ego, or an inflated ego. We tend to think that we should not have an ego. But as I said in my definition, it's impossible to not have an ego, because the ego is what we use to interact with the world. So it is impossible to function without an ego. And if we follow the example or the definition, we can have multiple or multifaceted egos, which serve a purpose in particular situations. For example, let's say professionally, I'm a police officer or a judge. I need to project a strong, stern, rigid ego. I need to project that self, that way of being into my work. But then at home with my family, I may not need that. I can be a loving, kind, gentle husband and father. And that ego is, well, we can say different, but another facet of the self that we want to project. So egos by themselves can also be multifaceted, or we can say probably two different personalities, depending on the situation. Not split personality, but we project what we want from ourselves into the world appropriately. And I think this is where, when we say our ego is out of control, that it's about we are projecting something that has an inappropriate way of interacting with the world in front of us, or our self, or the mass structure, the substrata in us, is based on things that should be analyzed and readjusted in a way that we better ourselves first, and in that way we can project a better ego. And this is what I wanted to define in terms of ego. So I'll reiterate that the ego is part of the self and not the entire self. And that's it on our episode of Diksha today. I hope you enjoyed the points, and I will see you. And that's it on our episode of Diksha today. I hope you found the points I made interesting, or probably have points of views of your own that you may wish to share. You can always drop a line, contact us on Facebook, and share your opinion with us. My name is Omkar, and I'll see you next time.